This trip took us across the southeast of Australia, from leaving our home on the mid-north coast and heading south down through Sydney. Then on down south into Canberra for a couple of days, and then we drove across to Wagga. From there, going across the Hay Plains and on to Mildura. From Mildura, we head into South Australia and Adelaide, where we lived there for a few years and we wanted to revisit some of our old haunts. And from there, we headed north up towards Burra. And leaving Burra for Broken Hill along the Barrier Highway. It's a lonely road. We spent nearly a week in Broken Hill and then headed east to Wilcannia and then on to Cobar for a few days. The next stop was Nara Mine before visiting my daughter and grandkids, after which we head home via Newcastle to check out the fire damage that may have happened close to us. We did our normal trick of leaving home in the late evening and spending the night behind the service station at Pheasant's Nest, south of Sydney, before driving on to Canberra past Lake George. Still no water in it. Next morning, we drove into Canberra to look at the Floriade display. Now this display, it runs from September and October, showing beautiful coloured flower beds laid out in different designs and patterns. It really is worth a visit, and from there we meandered around the lake. We drove up to Mount Ainslie to get a nice view of the city and of Parliament House. We drove to Wagga and settled into our caravan park next to the Murrumbidgee River. And on the Saturday morning, we drove the 40 kilometres to Junee to the chocolate and licorice factory. Of course, we had to do some sampling. From there it was on to Monte Cristo. Now this was a beautiful old mansion that had been restored, but since the owner died in 2014, it's not really been looked after. The gardens were dry and unkempt, and the house itself had been spoiled by cheap props, trying to enhance the spooky reputation it has. And these were totally unnecessary. We were actually very saddened by its state. There was a little bedroom that had been used as a shrine up on the first floor. ballroom was really quite a grand affair, but again themed and spooky. I thought it was really rather disappointing. Now, the old guardhouse at the RAAF base at Wagga had been turned into a museum about the base. It was rather nicely done. There's some great examples of old aircraft such as the Canberra bomber, the Meteor, the F-111, and the old Mirage, I remember from the 70s. Monday morning saw us heading west to Hay across the plains. And the caravan park at Hay was actually a very green oasis. Unlike the rest of the town, next it was a 300-kilometre drive to Mildura, and our first stop was the original homestead on the banks of the Murray. The homestead had a great wool shed. And there still are some examples of the old sheep pens and ramps within the wool shed, and a couple of the old wool presses. And being so far out, it also had its own cemetery. The Jeffy brothers had built the first irrigation system in Australia here, and they built this fine house and called it Rio Vista. It was a proper Queen Anne style house. Loved the hallway, and the stained glass windows on the landing were so detailed. This house was way ahead of its time, had its own ensuite. The paddle steamer Melbourne runs cruises each day, and we watched it go through the lock. The first pump that was used for irrigation was the cyclone pump, and the old boiler is still there, and the original pump house. Unfortunately, we couldn't get into it, it wasn't open that day. Next morning, we left Mildura for Wagga and soon crossed into South Australia, stopping for a quarantine check. No fruit or veggies into South Australia. We pulled into Renmark for lunch. It's a really nice, very neat little town. Besides nice gardens, there was also a nice Art Deco hotel and cinema. But of course the river is the focus for Renmark, and the paddle steamer industry runs cruises and is a bit of a museum, while the Mary River Queen is now a floating hotel and restaurant. That's a bit sad. When we arrived in Wagga, we found a nice quiet spot down by the river to free camp for the night. We relaxed for the afternoon, and some of the locals came past. Early next morning we took a look at the silo art in the town. We arrived in a cool and windy Adelaide just after lunch on the Friday afternoon to spend the weekend retracing our old favourite haunts from our time living there. On Saturday, our trip took us past our old house, then on to Strathalbyn for morning tea, and south down to Clayton Bay. This is where I used to go sailing when we lived there. Then we looped around to Goa before going to Victor Harbour and back home. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all the places we went, but here's a slide of the Clayton Bay Boat Club with Amadeus moored in the middle. That was over 30 years ago. Glad to see the club is still thriving. We drove round to Goa and went past the barrage, and we went to take a look at the new bridge over the Hindmarsh Island to see how the marina had developed. It's actually a lot bigger these days. On the Sunday morning we went down to Glenelg and of course walked to the end of the pier. Then it was a trip on the light rail into the city for a walk around the mall. Really, the mall hasn't changed much in the last 30 years. And we also walked over to the cricket ground using the new walkway across the river. The new updated cricket ground looks really good. On a Monday morning, we headed north to the picturesque old mining town of Burra. Now, the town is really neat and so well looked after. The information centre here has a great self-guided tour around all the interesting places, and you actually hire a key to get in and explore on your own. We thought that was really good. At the old mine you can wander around. Now you can also walk around the Red Rose Jail. This was made famous by the Breaker Morant movie. And you also go in and look at some of these underground cottages used by the early miners. We were now heading the 350 kilometres east to Broken Hill. In fact, for the last 200k of that, there was no fuel available. But we stopped for lunch about 100k west of Broken Hill. Not much there except for flies. We stopped in Broken Hill for a week, so we could have a really good look around. waste dumps from the original mine still dominate the city, and being a mining town, there were lots of old puppet heads still on show. On top of the waste heap, they have built a museum and a memorial to miners, the memorial being called the Line of Load Miners Memorial, and commemorates the over 800 miners that have lost their lives in this region's mines. This makes quite scary reading. Now, as with any mining area, I'm told there were over 70 pubs in the city over the years. Also, I find it interesting that in addition to the usual Christian churches, there is a synagogue and a mosque dating back to the early times. And of course, the Trades Hall, where the war for better conditions for the miners was fought and arguably won. A few kilometres north of town is a sculpture park, and it's a great place to go and watch the sun go down. Now, the late Pro Hart was a great artist and was famous for painting his Rolls Royce. He actually had a couple more to spare. And although he is better known as an artist, he also did many sculptures, and he loved insects. A few kilometres northwest of Broken Hill is the town of Silverton. This was the original mining town in this area, and at one stage of 3,000 residents, but today it's more famous as a movie set. But it really does have the real feel of an isolated outback town. They've turned the police station and jail into a great museum with lots of old mining stuff out the back. Many of the old buildings, not this one, have been restored. And again, just out of town is the nice iconic dry outback riverbed. It's also got a large cemetery, about 40 odd acres. And of course in this area not everyone could afford headstones. There's also a new memorial to the miners, made up with lots of pickaxes. We drove a few kilometres out to Monday Lookout. There doesn't look like there's much more out there. We drove on to Umber Reservoir, which is part of Broken Hill's water supply. No wonder they're on restrictions. After our time in Broken Hill, we headed eastward to Wilcannia. Now, being on the Darling River, it was once an inland port to bring the wool down, and even had rowing regattas. Today the old lifting bridge has been bypassed for a new bridge, but sadly, due to the drought, the mighty Darling River has ceased to flow. Despite that, the town is really very tidy, although I had the most expensive fuel we found our trip there, up to 15 cents per litre, higher than normal. There were some fine buildings there, like the post office, and the courthouse and police station. Now we stopped at the council-owned Caravan park, and to be honest, it was better than many others we've stayed at. Again, we're off heading east towards Cobar, another affluent mining town, copper this time. As usual, we gravitated to the Heritage Centre. That's actually in the old mine building. It's been turned into a really good museum. I liked it that they turned the basement into a mine. Outside, there were a wide range of old equipment. These include a lot of old Fairfield water tanks from Shepparton. But we found that the Health railway carriage that travelled to remote areas in the first half of the 20th century, the most interesting. Not something you ever actually think about. Across the road from the Heritage Centre was a park in honour of miners. And a few kilometres out of town, we could look down on the old open cut mine. This is one massive hole. In fact, the underground mine started in 2004. And if we look down to the south, we can see the new mine. We were off heading east again, this time to Nara Mine, and we stopped for morning tea at Ningen. And then we set up at the Nara Mine Airfield Caravan Park. It actually looks a lot different to what it looked during the Second World War. Now, Nara Mine is a centre for gliding, but with the cloud cover, it wasn't a great soaring day. But we did find a living sabre. There is a nice aviation museum there. It's well worth a visit. They have a beautiful Merlin engine from a Spitfire and a replica of the Wright Flyer. And of course, being a gliding centre, they had the first glider was built there, the Venture, plus the first powered aircraft that was built in the area. Heading to Kula, we could see the effects of drought and failed crops. We really hope this breaks soon. Arriving back home, we found out how close the bushfire got to our home. And I was amazed to find that my yacht that's stored off-site survived. Another good trip.